Hello and welcome to Castar Reviews. Halloween is a week away and we're almost done with the Dead Rising retrospective. Dead Rising 3 was a launch title for the Xbox One and as such was made to use all the gimmicks that the console had. Dead Rising 3 is the most open game in the series, with the entire map being the Californian city of Los Perdidos. This game was my first Dead Rising experience. I picked it up on sale with all of its DLC around Halloween a few years ago. I thought pretty highly of Dead Rising 2 last time out, so why don't we take a look at whether the third game of the franchise keeps the momentum going. Without further ado, this is Dead Rising 3. Dead Rising 3 takes place 10 years after the second game and stars Nick Ramos, a mechanic that works in Los Perdidos. In the intervening time between games, the government has created implantable chips that administer Zombrex without having to worry about hunting down medicine. Getting chipped is mandatory by law, but some people refuse the chips because they track the wearers using GPS. Just like in Dead Rising 2, a bunch of caged zombies were released in Los Perdidos, causing a zombie outbreak. Nick meets up with his boss Rhonda, a trucker named Dick, and a blonde girl named Annie, and they're holed up in a diner. Annie is one of those infected people that refuses Zombrex chipping, known as an illegal. Zombies are notified of their location because Dick accidentally turned on the jukebox and the group escapes to Rhonda's garage. Annie runs off somewhere else, more on her later. Nick ends up finding a transceiver and comes into contact with Jamie, who is in a security room somewhere. You never see what he looks like, but he basically fills the role of Otis and Stacy in the last two games. After fixing the TV in the garage, Nick, Dick, and Rhonda discover that there's a quarantine zone that is evacuating survivors. After driving there, the only thing at the quarantine zone ended up being a biker gang. Nick kills their leader and almost has a breakdown because he killed another human being. Dude, you have no idea what's going to happen later in this game. As they make their way back to the garage, the group runs into Diego, one of Nick's childhood friends. Diego knows that there's an old plane in the South Alameda warehouse and they can use it to escape before the inevitable firebombing. In the midst of planning this operation, Nick is bitten by a zombie. After he has a panic attack and is basically considered dead by Rhonda, she tells him that he can find some Zombrex in the crematorium. When he gets there, he runs into Gary, a stocky mobster looking for a dead girl for some reason. Nick helps him find the girl, who reminds him of Annie and finds out that there isn't any more Zombrex. So he basically asks Gary to kill him before he turns. Thankfully, Gary is too incompetent to kill him, and he realizes that Nick's wound is healing himself.
Wait a minute. Look at your wound, it's healing itself. I ain't never seen anything like that before. What kind of freak are you?
I guess I don't know what kind of freak I am.
I guess you don't need no Zombrex either. Huh. Well, it worked out okay, you know. I mean, I didn't really want to shoot you. You seemed like an okay guy.
Gary tells Nick that if Nick brings him Annie, they can get fuel for his plane. Nick consults his gang at the warehouse and they're all for it, so he tries to meet with Andy's group of illegals. He does and comes into contact with the gang's leader, Red, but apparently it's pretty easy to gain his trust.
The government is killing off the survivors that they find. They're not saving them. So if you can do some things for us, you know, go out, burn some equipment, short out some radios, mess with some cameras. You do that, then you got yourself a deal.
After gaining Red's trust, Red tells Nick that there's a flash drive containing military secrets that he needs. Nick volunteers to retrieve it, and he does so from a military officer named Hilda. Nick goes back to the illegals' hideout and Gary follows him. But before they can fight over Gary taking Annie, everyone but Nick is captured by the special forces. Nick sneaks into the compound and overhears Gerald, Hemlock, and Marion talking about the outbreak.
As your commander-in-chief, I order you to release me!
It's wonderful news that we found you, Madam President. Because you see, we really needed a body. Get her to eat someone low-ranking, get it on film, and get it to the media right away. And then shoot her head right off. Mission accomplished.
No. I want this Diego. He wasn't at the museum with the rest of his unit. We must find him.
I've allowed you to pursue this fantasy because I enjoy indulging you, Marion.
Deactivating the chips won't be so easy next time.
That's some shady shit, but that's not out of the ordinary for Dead Rising. After rescuing the captives, Red tells Nick where the fuel is and he brings it back to Rhonda and Dick in the warehouse. But then Rhonda tells Nick that Diego has run away to the museum. Nick fights him and calms him down. The two go back to the warehouse and Rhonda gives Nick a list of plane parts that she needs and where to find them, so Nick does just that. As the group is about to depart, Rhonda confides in Nick that she wants to make things right with her ex-husband and tearfully leaves. As Nick tries to find Annie and her group, he and Diego are captured by the military. Marion is looking for a cure for the zombie parasite and thinks that Nick and Diego might have it. Diego sadly doesn't survive the experiment and Nick escapes. While going through the lab, he runs into Isabella Keyes, who promises to tell Nick about his mysterious past. They plan to meet at the warehouse, and Nick finally goes to rescue Annie. But Gary is in his way and tells Nick that he misses his ex-wife, who it turns out is actually Rhonda. Nick goes to find her at the garage, but it turns out that the special forces got to her first and amputated her arm. It's not all bad though, because Nick makes her a new one, which doubles as a flamethrower. Gary lets him in the karaoke bar to rescue Annie, and the two return to the airplane. Back at the warehouse, Isabel informs Nick of his past.
What is it you have to tell me? No more hints, just out with it.
Your government built a lab near my village, all to make fatter cattle for your fat country to eat. And with the lab came soldiers from the US Army. They did what young men do. They spread their seed. And then when Dr. Barnaby discovered the bees, well, the zombies came. And your government killed most of the survivors so no one will tell the truth. Carlito thought it would be fitting that he should send the children back to the country which helped create them. Little time bombs like your friend Diego. But he did not want to create something unstoppable. So he made one of the orphans immune.
Oh my God, Nick.
This is you, Nick. You are the little life capsule Carlito planted.
Me?
You're what we've been waiting for.
You can be cured.
After that revelation, the gang meets Red in a shipping yard where he betrays Nick and tries to kill him for the bounty on his head. Red is then crushed by a shipping crate, and Hemlock gives the military 24 more hours to evacuate survivors before the firebombing. Also, Nick and Annie have a romantic moment, but suddenly a van pulls up and it turns out to be Chuck? That's right. Chuck Green has returned, and it turns out that Annie is actually a grown-up Katie going by her middle name. Chuck is Gary's boss, and it now makes sense why he was looking for Annie. Everyone goes back to the warehouse, but Gary and Rhonda volunteer to stay back because there isn't enough room on the plane. But before they take off, the group finds out that Hemlock is trying to make a super weapon out of some mutated zombies. This is the beginning of Dead Rising 3's overtime mode. Nick and Chuck hinder the collection operations, and Nick kicks Hemlock into a helicopter blade, ending overtime mode in Dead Rising 3. The secret cutscene that plays after overtime mode shows that Isabella Keyes is the one that caused the outbreak in Los Perdidos because she wanted to find the cure for the zombie outbreak. I don't know why Dead Rising 3 is as long as it is, but I can certainly tell you it's not because of the story. The story could easily have been told within the 3-day time limit of previous games, but a lot of the missions are padded. You feel like the game's going to end, but it actually doesn't. The lead up to getting the plane to be functional is my least favorite part, because it feels like if Rhonda could have just asked Nick to do multiple things at once, then it would have been half as long. The characters as a whole are pretty different to what we've seen before, and they all have their moments. I don't want to say that Nick is a better character than Chuck or Frank, but I think his actions are more believable for someone going through a zombie apocalypse. I also like the mother-son relationship Nick has with Rhonda, since Nick was an orphan and by the end of the game has a family to call his own. I also feel like this game is more connected to the continuity than the previous one, not only with the return of Chuck and Isabella, but also with the museum cataloging outbreaks and references to Dead Rising 2 and its spin-offs. It's a shame Frank isn't here though. I guess he was busy teaching journalism or whatever the fuck he was doing in Dead Rising 4. All in all, the story isn't anything we haven't seen before with Dead Rising, but I like these characters more than the supporting cast of the first two installments. Jeez, who turned out the lights? That was my first reaction when I booted up the prologue. I could barely see, it was so fucking dark. Thankfully, it got better though, and not only because I turned up the gamma slider. Dead Rising 3 takes place almost entirely outdoors, and wow, it looks great. The upgrade to the Xbox One has done wonders for the game engine. This game looked at the amount of zombies on screen in Dead Rising 2 and said, hold my beer. It's like you're fucking crowd surfing at a Post Malone concert. The model quality has also seen an upgrade, with faces looking much better on both humans and zombies, and the scenery of Los Perdidos looks gorgeous. Every section of the map feels different, from the mansions of Sunset Hills to the suburbs of Ingleton. While vehicles play more of a role in getting around the expansive map, you can't expect to drive in a straight line from point A to point B. There are obstacles in the way that make the city feel more like a zombie apocalypse is happening. With the massive shopping malls of Dead Rising 1 and 2, if there weren't any zombies there, you'd think it was closed or something. But in Los Perdidos, there's evidence of looting, military intervention, and pure chaos. Moving on to the sound design, I love it. It's more or less the same from the previous entries, so we'll leave it at that. The soundtrack is my favorite in the series by far. I'm a big fan of Nick's theme, and I feel like the more electronic themes fit better with the game. The funny thing is, one of the psychopaths, Teddy, basically turned Nick's theme into an EDM track and uses it for himself. The voice acting is great as usual, with the performances of Andrew Lawrence, Shelby Young, and Valerie Hubbard to be my favorites. One of the weird things about Chuck's voice is that sometimes he pronounces words like sorry as a Canadian would. His actor, Peter Fleming, is Canadian, but it's still weird coming from a character who I'm pretty sure is American. The presentation is a step up from Dead Rising 2, and let's see if the gameplay follows suit. Much like the transition from Dead Rising 1 to 2, Dead Rising 3 brings similar gameplay with some new twists. First off, the ticking clock that was present in previous games has been altered to the point of irrelevancy. Let me explain. You get 7 days to complete all the game's chapters, but things don't happen at specific times of day. Actually, Nick doesn't even wear a watch, so the time of day isn't as much of a factor as before. Side missions still have time limits, and you still have to complete the game within the 7-day time limit, so it seems like a bit of a half measure. Spoiler alert, but Dead Rising 4 takes this one step further, and we will get there next week, but it seems like if Capcom Vancouver didn't want the time limit to be a hindrance to gameplay, then they should have just gotten rid of it. While this may be a turn-off for some, there is an alternative in Nightmare Mode, which structures the story mode in the same way as prior entries. The save system was also overhauled. Now there are checkpoints during levels, and you can save your game at any point from the pause menu. No more being screwed out of an hour or so of progress just because you were low on health, needed to save, and found a psychopath in the men's room. I, for one, am completely on board with this change, mainly because I didn't like the save systems in the last 2 games. But, if you thought that system was awesome for some weird reason, that is the only way you can save the game in Nightmare Mode. The combo weapon system has also been expanded. Since Nick is a mechanic, he can combine 2 vehicles into one in addition to the variety of combo weapons. Another change to the system as a whole is that Nick can make combo weapons from anywhere, no matter what situation he's in. Also, with certain upgrades, Nick doesn't even need to follow the blueprints for combo weapons. As long as the weapons in question are in the same category as the ones in the blueprint, you can make that combo weapon. This makes the game much easier and kind of weakens the speciality of combo weapons. Since you can make them from anywhere and almost anything, there's nothing stopping you from only having combo weapons in your inventory. Another thing that tips the balance even further towards the easier end of the spectrum is the weapons locker. At safe zones across Los Perdidos, Nick can change clothes and access the weapons locker. In this, you can find every weapon you've ever touched in the game, and you can materialize it in your hands right then and there. If you're preparing for a psychopath fight, just find the nearest safe house and bring the combo weapons you're the best with. It neuters the challenge of trying to survive in a zombie apocalypse when you have an infinite source of weapons and materials. Don't get me wrong though, playing Dead Rising 3 is really fun to do. There are more collectibles to find this time around, like blueprints for combo weapons and statuettes of Frank West. This is also one of the few Xbox One games that actually support the Kinect. I had to dust off mine for a little bit and found out you can lure zombies with your voice and talk to psychopaths during boss fights. The last thing I would like to touch on is DLC. There are short DLC episodes called Untold Stories where you can take control of other characters and see the outbreak from their perspective. It's definitely interesting, but my favorite DLC has got to be
Super Ultra Dead Rising 3 Arcade Remix Hyper Edition EX Plus Alpha!
What a fucking title, am I right? This game turns Dead Rising 3 into a classic Capcom beat-em-up with Dead Rising 3's art style. Also, Nick, Chuck, Frank, and Annie are all cosplaying as different Capcom characters for you to play as. I love this mode to death, but my only problem with it is that there is no split-screen co-op. Sadly, most of my friends don't play on Xbox, and I think the couch co-op fits perfectly for this type of game mode. I honestly had a ton of fun playing Dead Rising 3. While it doesn't feel like a survival horror game anymore, it's still a blast to explore Los Perdidos, killing zombies in the most creative ways possible. I'm conflicted on whether Dead Rising 3 is a worthy successor to Dead Rising 2. It's a fun, action-packed zombie-killing experience, but it also departs from the conventions that the series is known for. Regardless, it's still worth playing, and I recommend playing it no matter your thoughts on the series. Halloween is next week, and that will be the last day of the Dead Rising retrospective, and we're heading back to Willamette, Colorado for Dead Rising 4. Thank you for watching this episode of Castar Reviews. Subscribe for more content from me and follow me on Twitter for production updates. See you soon.